The freezing wind blowing off Lake Winnipeg felt like a physical barrier against the chaotic wreckage of Jessie's past. Walking away from the diner, his adrenaline still spiked, his hands trembling as he dug into his jacket pocket. His fingers found the small, curled thermal receipt paper. Standing under a flickering amber street lamp, he carefully unfolded it. The 10 digits were written in thick blue ink. He pulled out his phone, his thumbs clumsy in the biting cold, and typed the number into a new message. "I told her to leave. She is gone. Are you okay?" Jessie stared at the glowing screen, watching his breath plume in the frigid night air. The suffocating weight of Darcy's ambush was already beginning to dissipate, replaced by a fierce anxiety regarding how the disruption had affected his friend. Seconds later, the typing bubble appeared. "I am currently operating at baseline. My heart rate elevated significantly during the introduction protocol, but my social scripts functioned correctly. I calculated you require a hot beverage to stabilize your adrenaline spike. Come over. We will have coffee. My address is 412 Lakeview Avenue, Unit 3. It is an apartment by the beach." Jessie smiled, the rigid tension in his jaw fully dissolving. He rapidly typed back an agreement. A second message immediately popped up on his screen. "I had considered suggesting we attend Friday night karaoke at the local Legion to observe musical variants. However, I recalculated the risks. It would be unsafe for you to be out with your ex-girlfriend on the prowl. My apartment is a strictly controlled environment." "I'm on my way," Jessie replied, slipping the phone into his pocket and leaning into the bracing wind. The walk took exactly 12 minutes. The apartment building was a modest brick structure situated directly across from the massive lake. The heavy crashing of freshwater waves against the shoreline provided a constant baseline of white noise. Jessie located Unit 3, stepped onto the concrete porch, and knocked twice, deliberately keeping the rhythm predictable. The deadbolt clicked open instantly. Kira stood in the doorway, having traded her maroon and yellow diner uniform for a faded, oversized t-shirt and loose sweatpants. She did not offer a verbal greeting. Instead, she stepped backward, leaving the path entirely clear for him to cross the threshold. "Take your boots off and align them perfectly parallel on the black rubber mat," Kira instructed, her tone clinical. "The coffee is already dripping. I estimated your walking speed based on the diner's distance and current wind resistance." Jessie stepped inside, closing the heavy door against the biting cold, and carefully placed his boots on the mat. The apartment smelled deeply comforting, a mixture of roasted coffee beans and old paper. The living space was sparsely decorated, but incredibly organized. Books and movie cases were arranged on the floating shelves with mathematical precision, color-coded and alphabetically sorted within each designated hue. The lighting was deliberately dim, cast by small amber floor lamps to prevent harsh visual sensory overload. "Thank you for inviting me over," Jessie said softly, keeping his hands visible and his posture relaxed. Kira walked into the adjacent narrow kitchenette and poured dark, steaming liquid into 2 identical heavy ceramic mugs. She returned and handed one to him by the thick handle, her movements precise to ensure their fingers did not accidentally brush. "You experienced a sudden trauma response in the diner workspace. My text messages were specifically designed to establish a safe connection. I require visual confirmation that your physiological systems are no longer in distress." "I'm okay," Jessie said, taking a slow sip of the bitter, hot coffee. "Really, walking away from her was infinitely easier than I thought it would be." Kira observed him closely for 5 seconds, her round hazel eyes scanning his facial muscles. "Your micro-expressions indicate honesty. The tension in your shoulders has decreased by approximately 40% since you were standing paralyzed behind the prep counter." She pivoted smoothly toward the center of the small living room, where a modest television sat perfectly centered on a low wooden stand. "To fully regulate our environment and lower your cortisol levels, I have decided we should engage in structured media consumption. Would you like to see my favorite movie? Jessie leaned against the back of the small gray sofa, blowing gently on the surface of his coffee. I'd love to. What is your favorite movie? Kira opened a clear plastic media case with a satisfying snap. It is an optical and auditory processing experience called The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. Jessie raised an eyebrow, a genuine laugh catching warmly in his throat. I have literally never heard of that in my entire life. It is a live-action fantasy film from 1953, written by Dr. Seuss, Kira explained, sliding the silver disc carefully into the tray of the DVD player. It features dictatorial piano instructors, synchronized roller skating twins attached by their facial hair, and unsettling structural geometry. The plot is highly illogical, which allows my brain to stop trying to predict the narrative variables. It is incredibly soothing. Sounds absolutely perfect, Jessie said, taking a seat on the far edge of the sofa, ensuring he left a wide, respectful physical buffer zone between them. Kira sat on the opposite end, pulling her knees up tightly to her chest. She aimed the remote at the screen, but before pressing the play button, she turned to look directly at his profile. Where did you originally meet the hostile variable, the one designated as Darcy? Jessie took a slow, deep breath, realizing the question was not an emotional interrogation, but rather Kira needing to properly categorize the threat data. We met in high school, back in Winnipeg. We were in the same graduating class. She was a cheerleader. Kira's nose wrinkled instantly in profound, visible distaste. A cheerleader. That fully explains the excessive floral perfume and the highly performative emotional display on the public sidewalk. Jessie nodded, staring into his dark coffee. She always cared a lot about how things looked to an audience. It is also biologically hazardous, Kira stated flatly, setting the remote carefully on her knee. In the mainstream wing of my high school, the cheerleaders maintain their required uniform measurements by actively engaging in bulimia. They purged their food in the second-floor bathroom immediately after the lunch period. I recorded the audio patterns from a corner stall 3 separate times just to verify the statistical frequency of the behavior. Jessie blinked, slightly taken aback by the sheer bluntness of the observation. I guess that happens, yeah. It is completely gross, Kira said, her voice dropping into a register of genuine, factual revulsion. And highly inefficient. Inefficient? Jessie asked, turning his head to look at her. Yes. Aside from the obvious caloric deficit, exposing the esophagus to repetitive hydrochloric stomach acid severely damages the mucosal lining. It degrades the vital enamel on the lingual surface of the teeth, leading to accelerated, painful decay. To intentionally subject one's own structural integrity to massive acid erosion, simply to fit into a synthetic pleated skirt, is the literal definition of normal freak behavior. Jessie let out a short, surprised breath that quickly turned into a warm, genuine chuckle. The clinical, unvarnished way she broke down the toxic, appearance-obsessed culture he had spent years trying to navigate was incredibly refreshing. Hearing his agonizing past reframed not as an emotional failing, but as sheer biological absurdity, lifted the final remnants of his heartbreak. You know, Kira, you're absolutely right. It is entirely gross. I am aware, Kira said, a tiny fraction of rigid tension finally leaving her own shoulders. She picked up the remote and pressed the green button. The television screen flickered brightly to life, filling the dim apartment with vintage Technicolor hues and bombastic, dramatic orchestral music. A young boy appeared on screen, complaining loudly about his piano lessons. Kira pulled her gaze away from Jessie and fixed it entirely on the bright, absurd world unfolding before them. Jessie took another slow sip of his coffee. He watched a man in a velvet suit command an army of boys to play a gigantic, winding piano. He did not try to understand the bizarre plot. He simply let the vibrant colors wash over him, listening to Kira's rhythmic, steady breathing from the other end of the couch. The lingering ghost of Darcy's betrayal was entirely gone now, successfully overridden by the scent of roasted coffee and the clean chill of the lake wind rattling the window. The chaotic notes of the film's score faded into the rolling white text of the credits. Jessie sat completely still, letting the warmth of the colorful world settle. Outside, the wind whipped off Lake Winnipeg, rattling the window panes, but inside, the atmosphere was perfectly calibrated. The dim amber lighting felt like a protective shell. For the first time since fleeing his past, his chest felt unobstructed. He breathed in the scent of roasted coffee, feeling profoundly anchored. Kira clicked the power button, plunging the television into silence. She did not move her knees from her chest, but she angled her head slightly, her short dyed red hair catching the dim amber light. The structural geometry of that film is highly impractical, but the costume design is notable, she stated, her voice breaking the quiet with its usual factual cadence. Specifically, the sequence designated as the get-together weather scene. I want the dress featured in that musical number. Jessie rested his cheek against the gray sofa, picturing the costume. It was a very nice dress, he agreed softly, keeping his tone neutral. It was structurally complex, Kira corrected lightly. I estimate acquiring a garment like that would be prohibitively expensive. The sheer volume of material indicates multiple sublayers of tulle and silk. It is a massive allocation of resources. Furthermore, a secondary complication arises. If I acquire such a garment, where exactly would I wear it? The localized environment of Gimli does not support formal attire. Walking on the cracked sidewalks would result in severe fabric degradation. Jessie smiled, a genuine expression reaching his big brown eyes, looking at her safe in her meticulously controlled space. I don't know about the sidewalks, Jessie said, running a hand through his fluffy hair. But I could definitely see that dress on you. You could wear it on a date, or maybe to a gala. Kira processed the auditory input, her round hazel eyes flicking toward the floor. The word date hung in the air, stripped of its societal pressure, presented simply as a logical framework for formal wear. After several seconds, she looked back. A gala is highly unlikely, as I do not enjoy large gatherings of normal people. However, the alternative application is acceptable. That is a good idea. She planted her feet flat on the floor. The conversation regarding the dress had reached a satisfactory conclusion, and she rapidly transitioned to a new cognitive track. She stared at the blank screen, silently plotting the logistics of her weekend schedule. The silence between them was the comfortable quiet of two people who had mutually agreed to drop all defensive pretenses. I have been evaluating my itinerary for the weekend, Kira announced, turning her face to look directly at him. Before I finalize my schedule, I have a preliminary inquiry. Would you like to try some rosewater lemonade? Jessie blinked, quickly adjusting to her rhythm. Rosewater lemonade? I've never had that before. Yeah, I'd love to try some. Kira stood up, her movements deliberate. She walked into the narrow kitchenette, opened the refrigerator, and retrieved a small, sleek aluminum can. She returned and extended her arm, holding the beverage out. Jessie took the little can, careful to hold it by the base so their fingers would not accidentally intersect. It is an imported hydration variable, Kira explained, sitting back down on her precise spot. It is from England. The carbonation levels are entirely predictable, and the floral distillation is not overwhelming. Jessie pulled the tab, the hiss of gas loud in the room. He took a slow sip. The taste was surprisingly delicate, a balance of tart citrus and fragrant sweetness. Wow, Jessie said, looking at the pale pink can. That is actually amazing. It is mathematically the best beverage, Kira confirmed. Unfortunately, my inventory is depleted. That was my final unit. Tomorrow, I am hoping to go to Winnipeg to procure more. Additionally, there is a game that I recently wanted to acquire. The specific retailer is located in the city center. Jessie pictured her navigating chaotic public transit systems. The volume of unpredictable variables was a recipe for sensory overload. Without thinking, his protective instincts engaged, tempered by a profound respect for her autonomy. "I will take you," Jessie said firmly, setting the can down on a wooden coaster. "I have my car. It runs perfectly. We can drive down to Winnipeg together tomorrow. You won't have to worry about the bus or the crowds." Kira stared at him. She analyzed the offer, searching for the hidden transactional strings that usually accompanied favors from normal people. There were none. He was simply offering to be a reliable variable in her high-variance world. "That is highly efficient," Kira said slowly, nodding her head in approval. "The acoustic environment of a private vehicle is significantly easier to regulate. I accept your proposal." She paused, her brow furrowing slightly as a new calculation overwrote the previous one. She looked toward the heavy wooden door, then back to Jessie. The reality of the external world seeped into the amber-lit sanctuary. "However," Kira began, her voice taking on a clinical edge, "I have factored in the current threat level. The hostile variable, Darcy, is currently loose in Gimli. She has demonstrated erratic stalking behavior and disregard for boundaries. It is mathematically unsafe for you to be out there walking back to your cabin with your ex-girlfriend on the prowl." Jessie felt a slight tightening in his chest, quickly overshadowed by the immense gravity of Kira's logic. He waited for the conclusion of her assessment. "You are welcome to stay the night here," Kira stated flatly, pointing a finger toward his end of the sofa. "I have a sanitized cotton blanket. The sofa accommodates your skeletal framework. It is the most logical protocol to ensure your continued safety." Jessie's breath hitched. For Kira to invite a variable into her highly controlled environment was a monumental leap of faith. Inviting him to sleep, there was a profound declaration of trust. The betrayal that drove him out of Winnipeg belonged to a different lifetime. Sitting in the dim apartment, he realized he had found exactly what he needed. "Thank you, Kira," Jessie said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "I would really like that." Kira gave a single, sharp nod of confirmation. She stood up to retrieve the blanket, her environment secure, leaving Jessie to listen to the steady, comforting rhythm of the lake wind, her eyes precisely 3 minutes before her alarm was scheduled to sound. The ambient temperature of her apartment had dropped overnight, but the heavy rhythmic crashing of Lake Winnipeg against the shoreline remained a constant, predictable baseline. She sat up, mentally reviewing the sequential steps required for a successful transition into the external world. First, the coffee. She moved to the narrow kitchenette and initiated the brewing sequence. She selected 2 identical stainless steel travel mugs, ensuring the lids were completely devoid of residual moisture. She poured the dark, steaming liquid equally into both vessels, measuring by eye to maintain volumetric symmetry. Only after the travel mugs were sealed and aligned perfectly parallel on the counter did she proceed to her bedroom to change out of her oversized sleepwear and into a structured green sweater and comfortable dark jeans. Order of operations was critical to maintaining equilibrium. Jessie stirred on the gray sofa, the sanitized cotton blanket slipping slightly off his shoulder. He opened his big brown eyes, momentarily disoriented by the dim amber lighting, before the memories of the previous night settled over him like a protective weight. Darcy's ambush at the diner felt like a distant, irrelevant data point, successfully neutralized by this safe, controlled environment. He sat up, stretching his limbs, his fluffy hair entirely unkempt. He stood and walked softly to the small bathroom, washing his face with cold water to fully dispel the lingering fog of sleep. When Jessie emerged into the living space, the digital clock on the microwave read exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Kira was standing by the kitchenette, holding her canvas tote bag, her posture rigid, but lacking the defensive tension she normally exhibited around unexpected variables. "Good morning," Jessie said, keeping his voice low and devoid of sudden inflection. "I slept really well, thank you again." Your respiration rate dropped to a steady baseline within 14 minutes of closing your eyes, Kira stated, picking up one of the travel mugs and extending the other toward him by its base. "I have prepared the required morning hydration." Jessie took the hot metal mug, careful not to let their fingers brush. He took a sip, letting the bitter warmth ground him. "I'm going to walk back to my cabin, get my car, and bring it right back here to your apartment door. That way, we can head straight to the city without you having to wait in the cold." Kira processed the logistical adjustment. "That is an acceptable and highly efficient protocol. The wind chill is currently aggressive. I will wait inside until you send a text message indicating arrival." 20 minutes later, Jessie pulled his reliable sedan up to the curb of the brick apartment building. True to his word, the vehicle was sufficiently warmed. Kira emerged from the front door, her head down against the biting wind, and quickly settled into the passenger seat. She immediately engaged her seatbelt, pulling the strap tight across her chest, and reached into her tote bag. As Jessie navigated the sedan away from the lake and onto the long stretch of highway heading south toward Winnipeg, Kira produced a plastic jewel case. She pressed the eject button on the car's media console, verifying the slot was empty, and inserted a silver CD. A bouncy, theatrical, and heavily rhythmic melody filled the cabin. There were accordions, upbeat percussion, and a vocalist singing with dramatic, almost vaudevillian energy. Jessie blinked, glancing at the radio display before returning his eyes to the flat, frost-covered prairie stretching out before them. "This is definitely a unique sound," Jessie said, a genuine smile forming. "What kind of music is this?" "The musical collective is called The Cog is Dead," Kira explained, her voice cutting through the energetic instrumentation. "The specific genre is classified as steampunk." Jessie tapped his thumbs on the steering wheel in time with the driving beat. "Steampunk? It almost sounds like it was meant for kids, like a soundtrack for an animated movie or a theatrical play." "Your auditory assessment is a common misconception," Kira replied, staring straight ahead at the asphalt. "The melodic structure relies heavily on major keys and upbeat tempos, which normal people typically associate with juvenile entertainment. However, it is not intended for children. The lyrical content often deals with complex mechanical narratives, Victorian industrialism, and societal collapse, merely disguised by a fast tempo and theatrical vocal delivery." Jessie listened closer to the words filling the car. The song swelled into a chorus about a massive, floating airship and a crew of daring pirates navigating through the clouds. As he drove down the monotonous stretch of highway, Jessie's mind easily latched onto the vivid imagery. He could clearly see the billowing canvas sails of a giant dirigible, the glint of brass gears, and the smoke stacks chugging against a bright blue sky. The music painted a wildly imaginative picture, entirely divorced from the gray, freezing reality of the Manitoba winter outside the windshield. For a solid 10 minutes, the music played, and Jessie simply enjoyed the auditory escape, stealing occasional glances at Kira. She sat completely still, but the slight, rhythmic tapping of her index finger against her knee indicated she was actively processing and enjoying the auditory input. The warmth of the car heater and the bombastic, accordion-driven melodies created a strange, perfect cocoon against the outside world. He realized how rare it was to find someone whose silence felt just as inviting as their conversation. Eventually, the sprawling, flat fields gave way to the dense, concrete perimeter of Winnipeg. The transition from the isolated quiet of Gimli to the chaotic, intersecting highways of the city required an immediate shift in Jessie's focus. Vehicles merged aggressively, and the visual noise of billboards and traffic lights replaced the stark, clean horizon. Jessie navigated the perimeter highway, keeping the car's interior temperature perfectly steady. "Since we made it to the city in good time, We should probably get some food before we track down your imported lemonade and your video game. Where would you like to go for lunch?" Kira did not answer immediately. Instead, she retrieved her smartphone from her pocket. She navigated past her meticulously organized home screen and opened a banking application, requiring a precise combination of facial recognition and a numerical passcode. She stared at the digital ledger, her hazel eyes scanning the current balance and calculating the allowable resource expenditure for the afternoon. "My current financial reserves are sufficient," Kira announced, locking the screen and slipping the phone back into her pocket. "I have enough capital to afford an excursion to Yee's." "Yee's?" Jessie asked, easing the car into the right-hand lane as they approached a busy commercial intersection filled with massive retail blocks. "The buffet place." "Yes," Kira confirmed, her tone carrying a fraction of factual enthusiasm. Buffets are highly logical establishments because the visual presentation of the food allows for immediate quality assessment before consumption. There are no hidden variables disguised under sauces ordered blindly from a menu. Jessie chuckled, a warm sound that filled the small space of the sedan as he stopped at a red light. "That makes a lot of sense. Yee's it is." "Furthermore," Kira added, looking out her passenger window at the passing strips of restaurants and department stores, "they maintain a consistent supply of sweet egg sushi. The texture is mathematically perfect. It is dense, slightly sweet, and the rice-to-egg ratio is entirely predictable. I love sweet egg sushi." "Then sweet egg sushi is exactly what we are going to get," Jessie promised, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. Maneuvering through the loud, chaotic city felt entirely manageable, as long as the environment inside the car remained perfectly calibrated.